Business Source is proudly sponsored by JCH Communications. When it comes to marketing, we mean business. From websites to videos, we can guarantee you a return on your investment. Take a look now on our website at our video, www.jchcom.com.
Hi, and welcome to Business Source, brought to you by Connecting Business, the show that gives you authentic conversation to help your business. There's no smoke and mirrors, just real people sharing their experiences. I'm your host, Lee Nightingale, and today I'm joined by my great friend, Ian Davies, to discuss the work versus life balance when you have kids. Ian currently works at the BBC. I'll let him share his role and the journey it took to get him there. Ian, welcome. Thank you for joining me on Business Source. I'm really excited to chat with you. You know, you and I have had many fireside chats around barbecues and beer, but I'm really keen to share your journey because we're in a similar position, juggling small children and work, something which many parents, I'm sure, will relate to. Thanks for joining me.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. So if you could perhaps just share with the viewers and listeners where you're at now, and I'd like to then sort of wind the reel back on those highlights, if you will, and just that journey through to where you are today.
Yeah, sure. So as you mentioned, I currently work for the BBC, and most recently I've been working as head of product for BBC's iPlayer product, the product most people certainly in the UK will know, but internationally as well. But it's been quite a wavy career path to get to my position at the BBC. So I'll try and give you a brief overview of how I've got there. So I've basically worked in digital content product for 23 years now. Starting my career while I was at university, my degree course ran a program where you did 2 6-month work placements as part of your degree. And I started working for a very, very, very small web company at a very small shared office in Harrow in North London, that were doing something quite pioneering at the time, although we probably didn't realize it, which was putting what was called the Columbus World Travel Guide. It was an encyclopedia for travel agents. When you used to go in and sit at a desk and ask someone to book a holiday, they used to grab this off the shelf and it would give you all the information about your destination in terms of what visas you might need, entry requirements, inoculations you might need, and so on. So we had this company had an idea to put that online, but quite uniquely started selling advertising for hotels and tourist attractions against those country entries and so on. So it's
that's really forward thinking. Yeah,
quite forward thinking. That was in 1997, very early days of the internet. So I kind of did a bit of everything there. Wrote HTML, cropped images, wrote copy for the website, did a load of things really, and worked with clients as well. And I think that experience helped me get my first kind of real job straight from university, which was working for AOL in the UK. So it seems a long time ago now, but in 1998, AOL was almost the primary way to get the internet in the UK. You used to load it up off a little CD-ROM, off a free magazine.
And you could never get it off your machine, by the way.
Which would give you access to email and content, but actually content not in the kind of World Wide Web format that we're used to now, but a very kind of proprietary set of content. So I started my work there really as a kind of what was called initially a content producer, but really you did a bit of everything. So you were writing copy, cropping images, working with designers to create online propositions and those sorts of things. So I kind of like to think I've been doing product management before anybody called it product management, and that's going back a long way. So and that's largely been the kind of the nature of my career right through. So I started with AOL. I worked there for 2.5 years, then decided to scratch the travel itch and went around the world on my own for 7 months. After that, I ended up in Manchester for a year working on a portfolio of football websites doing very similar things, in the role of editor, but again kind of in digital media being responsible for more than just the content. I then returned to London, where I was working for AOL in 2002 to take up a post with the English Institute of Sport. So this is a bit of the left field bit of my career. So the English Institute of Sport is a body that provides sports science and sports medicine support to elite athletes, lottery funded athletes in Olympic and Commonwealth sports.
Right.
But they were just starting when I joined them, so there was a real kind of PR and comms job to do about kind of explaining the value of the work that organisation did. So I was hired as part of the comms and PR team to take care of our digital proposition, so our website, email, newsletters, those sorts of. And it was a terrific job, just a very unique job, being able to kind of, one day, meeting Steve Redgrave and interviewing him, those sorts of things, those sorts of opportunities you really just don't get, or watching James Cracknell train on a rowing machine in Marlow, those sorts of things.
And the tech back then is a million miles away from what it is now, right? So it's one thing writing out what they call now customer journey, if you like, but implementing it back then meant, and I'm sure you're going to share this at some point, you didn't have HubSpot, Marketo, Eloqua, the huge marketing automation, email marketing platforms. There's perhaps some sort of email marketing, very basic platform, but it was print, it was TV, it was radio, it was magazine, it was everything, right?
Yeah, and so I mentioned our kind of email newsletter, which is probably very similar to the sorts of activity you do in the kind of CRM space and so on. But it was very unsophisticated. It was kind of send out an email newsletter, hope your website traffic for the things you were promoting went up, but you really couldn't join the dots between those journeys at all. So it kind of very much, I think in those days, very much relied on kind of editorial skill and training, rather than some of the things that actually, as I've gone on in my career, data and analytics is just a vital part of what we do, and it's just the lifeblood of how we do product development now. But yes, in those days we cared about the data, and actually, really strangely, back at AOL in 1998, that's probably some of the most sophisticated data analysis that I've ever worked with in terms of the internet, and that's, I think, partly to do with it was a completely owned and operated proprietary system, and we could really track every interaction. And actually, they were AOL was very careful to do that from the start. So we really did know things about our audiences, and were able to target them with the right content, even back then, which seems surprising now, because sometimes that's still a challenge for some of the digital products we work on. On today. But anyway, I'll rattle through the rest of my career, because it kind of has flown by, even though it's been 23 years. So yeah, I ended up at the English Institute of Sport for 3 years. As I say, a fantastic and rare opportunity to work in that organisation. But it kind of got to a limit of what I could achieve there. The comms, PR, digital media part of the business was far from the core of the business. It wasn't what we did. It was a supporting activity, great for a period of time, but had a limit. So I kind of moved back into the world of kind of commercial websites, and went to work for a company called Wanadoo, which was a free internet service provider, initially built up by Dixon's, where you would phone this is in the days of dial-up, which is showing my age. You'd have a free phone or a certain prefix telephone number in the UK. You would dial into that and get your internet access for free, and just be paying a small premium on your phone bill for that access. And then the proposition was largely funded by a content proposition, which was funded by advertising. But I joined them at a time where they were merging with their parent company Orange, who sold phones and mobile phone contracts and so on. So I was responsible as kind of homepage manager for bringing those propositions together, which is quite a different, those are very different worlds, kind of ad funded media and transactional sales for mobile phones and
yeah, because back then, really, we're not talking about smartphones with wonderful browsing capabilities and apps and all that stuff, right?
Yes, no, it was it was on the cusp of the iPhone being released, but still very much not much in the way of internet over mobile. So I stayed there to manage that transition, and then I was headhunted for a role at ITV.com to relaunch ITV.com in 2007, and that was the first time I'd worked in earnest in video on demand, streaming, etc., which has been the mainstay of my career since 2007, really. So at ITV.com, we relaunched the service. We say we were very proud to get that service live to audiences 6 months before iPlayer launched, but that and someone who's worked recently for iPlayer, that's not quite the reality, because iPlayer was kind of available to many people in beta for a couple of years before that. So right. I've been falsely trading on the fact that we got there first with ITV.com. But yeah, as I say, that's kind of been the majority of my career, working in streaming, particularly in sport. So ITV was largely responsible for bringing the Rugby World Cup to bear online. We worked with Formula One to bring online streaming to UK audiences for the first time at ITV. And I worked on a range of things at ITV, but sport was predominantly my focus. I then, after 3 years, went to the Press Association to head up their product development function, or actually kind of recruit and develop their product development function. So still with a foot in video and streaming and so on, but also in business-to-business services like data feeds on football scores or TV listings or news services and those sorts of things. And I think the benefit I had in that role was that I built these propositions as a kind of from an audience perspective, so I had a better understanding of what you might need as a customer to turn that into something for your audiences. So I always call it business to consumer, because we knew how to do the last bit, and I was responsible for recruiting. I kind of continued that path in my next role, where my next major role, where I worked for Perform Group, which is now the kind of streaming media company DAZN, or DAZN, which you'll see around in lots of places. And I worked on a portfolio of video products for them. So syndicated advertising funded video products, where we would secure content and rights to football leagues, basketball leagues, all those sorts of things, and distribute them to publishers for free. But we would sell the advertising on those propositions and to help pay for that, and do that on a global basis. So I was developing the kind of product and systems that would allow publishers to integrate that really effectively with their content propositions. And then after 3 years there, a job opportunity that I couldn't turn down came up at the BBC. It'd been an ambition of mine to join the BBC for a long time. I'd had 2 or 3 interviews previously, one which I rejected and regretted ever since, a second one which I did abysmally at the interview, but I really wanted to give it another go, and I joined in 2015 to take responsibility for what's called their red button services. So anybody listening outside the UK may not know what this is, but it's kind of interactive capabilities on broadcast TV to allow things like additional channels for major sporting events like Olympic Games, Wimbledon, those sorts of things, but also a data service, so a kind of precursor to the internet, if you like, but delivered over broadcast, so not requiring an internet connection. I spent time there developing the BBC's interactive TV portfolio, so developing connected TV apps for news and sport, and developing our connected proposition on TVs, so adding things into the mix in broadcast, things like being able to live restart in iPlayer from a TV channel when you press the green button, and those sorts of things. And then over my time, I eventually ended up as head of product for iPlayer, and I think that broadly brings me up to date. And I say broadly because in the last 2 months, at the end of September, I decided to reduce my working week down to a 3-day week with the BBC. So that means I've moved on from my head of product role at iPlayer. I'm still working with the iPlayer teams on some strategic challenges around product distribution. But yeah, I took the decision to kind of ramp down on career work, if you like, and now I spend 2 days a week looking after my children, which is I guess something we're going to get into in earnest.
Absolutely, because I mean thanks for sharing that, and it's an illustrious and hugely exciting career, and some of the companies you've worked within, are known, very well known, certainly here in the UK, and it sounds like you've had an absolute blast and a ball. I mean, it's almost like ideal jobs, working in digital content, TV and sport, and then sort of streaming stuff and internet. It's massively interesting, certainly to me, and I'm sure a lot of other people out there. But then life all changed, right?
Yeah,
And it's a
and
matter of small feet.
yeah, and all kind of changed quite quickly, I suppose. So I joined the BBC in 2015, got married in 2015. We had our first child in January 2018. She'll be 3 in January 2021, and then 18 months after she arrived, we had a surprise arrival and my son was born. And in that time, me and my wife Claire have moved out of London to Berkhamsted, where we both live, just northwest of London. And yeah, moved from a 1-bedroom flat in the middle of the city to a house on the edge of the countryside. So yeah, it's been quite well, as I'm sure it has. We've not followed a dissimilar path in the last few years.
Absolutely, yeah. We were central London until May last year, and moved out, and our girl was born August last year. So yeah, so that's a similar sort of path and journey, and always sort of been involved in tech, and software and sales and internet related stuff. So there's definite close alignment there. But I really want to dig into that period, sort of 2018. I don't want to get into the surprise element of a second child. I mean, I don't want to get into biology with you, and birds do it and bees do it and all the rest of it. But so 2018, talk me through that year, because Claire, your wife, obviously took maternity leave.
Yeah.
But from the discussions you and I have had, there were conversations prior to the birth of your daughter around what your desires were and values were about shared parenting, and it'd be really great if you could share those.
Yeah. So I think we'd always had the conversation around not assuming it was one of our jobs to raise the kid and one of our jobs to go to work and earn the money. And I think that's been a really kind of positive discussion, for an ongoing discussion for us throughout. And I think one of the tenets there really is kind of founding on it. A decision you make now is not necessarily a decision you make forever. But we kind of realized that I think we were very clear and very consistent and aligned on it together, that we felt that both of us couldn't work at the level we were both working in. So my wife Claire works for Facebook in a senior marketing role. It's quite a demanding role, and certainly pre-lockdown days, if you add the hour-long commute either side of the day, it can be a long day, as was my role. And my role at the BBC since joining in 2015 has been travel has been a part of that job, not internationally, but between our London, Salford and Glasgow bases. So when I started at the BBC, I was spending 2 days a week in Salford every week, sometimes 3 days, 2 nights away. And I think you realize quite quickly, once you have a child, that means 2 nights away, you don't see them very much at all, because you're up to get an early train, and then you get back after they've gone to bed 2 nights later. So suddenly you've gone 4 days without seeing your children, and just that, I think we always felt that wouldn't sit right well with both of us doing that. So we'd always had a very open conversation about making sure that we were open to thinking about what the best thing to do for the kids and our family was. And I guess there's some important things that enabled that, really. I guess my wife and I met slightly later in life, I suppose. We were 39 38 and 39 when we got married. And actually that allowed us both to kind of get established in our careers, in our respective careers. And I think it's something that's often, it can be a bit of an inevitability that the balance in the relationship goes one way, in that it falls to the woman to look after the children. And I think we felt, well, it doesn't need to be like that. And we've thankfully, because of where we were in terms of establishing ourselves in our careers, we had some optionality there, which I know is a luxury. But yes,
there's two sides to that. And sorry to jump in there. There's the financial element, of course, which is a huge driver to that. But then there's the job side of it, and within the job, it's the employer and what their flexibility is, right? So it's okay as deciding, yeah, that's what we're going to do, but in the reality of it is, A, can we financially make it work? B, is my employer going to support that? So what was your experience there from the employer side?
So I think there's two angles there, and my employer, I'll talk about it specifically, but very supportive of more flexible working arrangements and parental leave and so on. But I guess I didn't take that for granted, and going back to my kind of career path, I sort of think I've trained myself, if you like, for not being worried about job moves. So I've moved around a lot in my career. I've had to do that because of the nature of the businesses I've worked in, where there's probably not just an annual kind of progression to the next level of role, and I've had to move kind of sideways and up to move around. So I feel, because I'd established myself in my career, if I stepped back from work and didn't work for a while, I feel confident enough to kind of re-enter the industry in a couple of years, and I keep abreast of movements and things like that, and things that are happening in the space. But that doesn't frighten me, that kind of move away. But which
is liberating, and it's from a mental standpoint, it's nice to have that freedom. Yes, again, financially, all right, whatever, but the mentality side of it, of it's okay, I'm establishing my career, I've got great experience, I've worked for some great companies and brands, it's going to be okay, I'm going to take this short break, and I'm confident in my abilities that I'll be able to get back into that job market.
Yeah, and I don't mean that to sound arrogant.
Not at all, no.
I think it's just having the self-confidence that actually, when you do, if you did take a break and then re-entered the world of work, that you wouldn't be judged for that. And I actually think more and more you'd be judged quite positively for making that move for a particular reason. So
women do it all the time, and they absolutely do not get the recognition that they deserve for having done that.
And I think that's an important point. I'm sure we'll come on to this, but yeah, it has been a bit of a surprise to me how interesting this move has been for lots of people that I kind of work with, and perhaps it's just, I think it's the nature of it's still surprising for the man in the relationship to kind of make that move. But I realize I haven't talked about exactly what happened, really. So I was working for the BBC in my role, and when my daughter was born, and from the off, we'd always said I would take advantage of a policy in place with the BBC, which was to allow up to 3 months of shared parental leave, and I was always intending to take that. So obviously, naturally, there is a period of time it made more sense for Claire, my wife, to do the first 9 months of that of childcare once Hallie, my daughter, had been born. But then it was always the plan for me to take over for the last 3 months, and my wife was going to go back to work. And then we didn't have a firm plan for what we were going to do after that period, really. But yeah, so that's how I got into the kind of parental leave. My employer was very, very supportive of that. It's a policy that the BBC has, and is very supportive of. So my role was kept open, made provision to cover my duties and so on. Right. So I didn't feel any yeah, any particular anxiety, certainly about that kind of initial period of 3 months that I took off to look after my daughter. And I think also just the way in which we did that was quite interesting. So my wife was due to return back to work in the December of 2018. So I started my childcare stint at the start of November, and we decided, as a small family of three with our 9 month uh, 9 month old daughter, to take a road trip across California. And as I
you do,
mentioned,
yeah.
my wife Claire works at Facebook, so she decided to do her first week back in her role in December in California, and we had we had a 4 week road trip leading up to that with my little girl, which was just rare and fantastic time, really.
Oh, fantastic. And I guess it's there really where I wanted to talk about that transition period um, from mum being the primary
Yeah,
carer to dad being the primary carer. Um, Inevitably, in most relationships, what happens is, baby's born, dad gets a week, two if he's lucky off at the point of birth, and then back to work, and that's it.
yeah,
Um, Obviously, you've been fortunate enough to be able to take that 3 month period,
yeah,
but you're just describing there that there was a transition period of that 4 weeks where both of you were the primary carer, which must have helped in that transition, not only for Hallie, getting used to you being the carer there, but also for you,
yeah.
and what was that transition like? So if you can talk about that sort of middle ground period, but also that transition into just you of being the primary carer.
Yeah, sure. So, no doubt that helped, and actually being away from the kind of normality of normal life and being in California in 17-degree nice sunshine, being able to
Yeah,
walk around
always
outside.
helps.
Uh, so I am extremely lucky and fortunate for having that opportunity. Certainly that transition helped, but it also wasn't particularly daunting for me. I think from the start, really, not we obviously hadn't shared childcare equally. I'd gone back to work full time after my initial kind of 2 week block, as you say, parental leave. But yeah, we would typically kind of share the childcare duties around the work week, weekends, and so on. And I
Right.
think one of the things we did early on, which was really important, which was just to make sure that either of us could, uh, aside from kind of early days of breastfeeding and so on, either of us could feed Hallie, either of us could bath her, either of us
Right.
could, you know, take her out, whatever it might be. And I think as a result, she just wasn't she wasn't so attached to Claire, my wife. She wasn't so clingy.
Right.
But then certainly that transition period where we were able to kind of jointly parent for a period of time without the normal distractions that you might have, was an incredibly precious time, and that made my time when I took over formally, which was we were staying in an Airbnb in Palo Alto. Claire was going to work every day for that week, and yeah, I was wandering around with my daughter, sitting in coffee shops, listening to people pitch startup ideas, which is amazing.
But it must have helped because it's really daunting for any parent, male, female, or otherwise, to then become solely responsible for this living thing, and that living thing, as we both know, requires routine.
Yeah,
So when you're away at work Monday to Friday, you don't get to see that routine
yeah,
in play. So it's really great that you're able to sort of have that transition period where you could almost sort of, I'm not going to say take a step back, but witness and watch the routine and go, right, okay, that's when this happens, that's when that happens. She prefers it when you do things this way, that way, because when you're just like given the baby and right,
that's it. It's very, very daunting. So
No, that was so that we had a proper in work speaker handover period, and it was very, very useful, because we were we were okay, we're getting up now. And I used to be around for breakfast occasionally, and not be completely away for 5 days, because often I would work from home 1 day a week and those sorts of things. So I'd be aware of the routine, but that's very different from living it and breathing it every day. And I'm sure you've taken this opportunity as well with your daughter, and I'm sure you find this saying that I agree completely that routine is really important. It's important for them. It's also important for you to help manage that day, I think, because
yeah, I was.
I don't know how you felt, but it is it's a very different mode from your kind of work brain. Uh, but it isn't easier or harder. It's relentless, but it's very, very different. And I think actually the routine helps mum and dad and baby
Yeah,
as
yeah,
well.
you're right. I the fortunate thing from my side of things is that I have a home office. So while my wife Dahlia was off on maternity leave with Mia, our daughter, um, I was able to kind of duck in and duck out to see them both. So I wasn't heading out and going to an office and not being present during the day. But clearly, I'm still at work. Work needs to be done running the company, and but in break times, I was able to sort of step out, see what's going on. Um, and ultimately, if Dali needed some support and help with something, I was able to sort of step out and help. So I didn't really have that solid transition period, but it was more of a soft transition,
Yeah,
if you like. But then, come January, when Dahlia went back to work, that for me there was that little bit of a, oh my goodness. And what you may well laugh, and the viewers and listeners might laugh, but I was able to draw upon the experience of when I got Snoop, my Labrador, who's now 8 years old. And I remember the day when I picked him up at 8 weeks old, and you get them home and you kind of like, oh yeah, this is amazing, I've got a puppy. And then within about 10 minutes, it dawns on you that this tiny little thing is incapable of looking after itself. I mean, it can't do anything for itself, and has got no control over bodily functions, and requires you to feed it and keep it alive. So I kind of drew upon those experiences. I thought, okay, look, I did a good job with him. He's still alive, barely at the moment, but that's a different story. But I was able to sort of get through that, and I was able to draw on that experience. But as I transitioned into the primary carer, for me, I didn't have Dahlia here.
yeah,
She was off going
yeah,
to work right up until obviously the pandemic hit in March. Um, and so then, it just becomes me and the baby in the house, and you're kind of thinking, right, what happens if something goes wrong? Who do I call? Where do I go? And you start to have those thoughts. And then you get into the whole groups, the parent groups and the baby groups. And I know you and I have had some similar sort of experiences there. It's one thing going to a coffee shop with the baby, and you get mums and other adults looking over, going, oh, that's great. Dad spends some time
yeah,
with the baby. I mean, and you can't expect them to know the full story. I'm not saying that, but there's a certain look that you get as a dad looking after a baby. It's more of a cutie, and especially when you go to the mums groups. And I think for me, what I found was that uh, when you live within a certain area and you go into the prenatal classes, the mums have already got some relationships, and they've kind of gone through that journey together, and rightly so. Rightly so. I'm not saying otherwise. But they've established those friendship groups, and then all of a sudden, Dad gets parachuted in, into these groups, and again you get a similar sort of look around. Oh, he's here, he's doing his morning, or he's doing his hour. And you and I both had this experience where you kind of felt yourself justifying and sharing, saying, no, I'm the primary carer.
Yeah. No, and that's definitely the case. Just wanted to go back to something that you said. I think that, certainly around routine, and I think baby groups and things like that are very much part of that routine. But from what I know of you, and certainly how I kind of see myself is, I'm quite a planned person. So I can kind of, and actually my wife, I sort of get some criticism for this sometimes, because my default is kind of look to the end of how it might all go wrong, and then what steps I might need to take to make sure it doesn't go wrong, or make sure it goes great. It's a kind of critical, but I think that's the nature of the sort of job that I've done for 23 years. You're kind of launching digital products, things like that. You have to be quite particular about the steps you make to get those out.
Understood,
so that's just kind of ingrained into me. I think that's been quite helpful as a parent, because as you say, you start worrying about these things, but if you can tackle those logically and think, right, what do I need to do there? Or if I'm going out, what if the baby gets hungry? Well, but maybe I'll pack a snack, or just simple thing. And I know it sounds really base and really rudimentary, but actually I think if you've got if you're prone to planning and being organized, that's a huge help in this. And then I think that leads on to kind of making, you mentioned it then, they need constant care, they need entertaining, they need stimulation, and I think you need to find the things in the day that can give them that. And you mentioned baby groups, but walks in the park, walks to places that you've not been before, all of those sorts of things. But I think just having having those sort of plans for the week ahead, the day ahead, were a really important tool for me, really, because I think once it becomes very apparent quickly when you haven't got a plan how tough it is. So if you've got a plan that actually, after the baby wakes up after their midday nap at 1:30, I haven't really got anything planned for the rest of the day. Well, 1:30 till 6 o'clock is a very, very long afternoon if you've got if you've got planned. But then that leads on to your point about those kind of baby groups. So I used to take Hallie to a couple of groups. So Monkey Music, a kind of music group for toddlers, and then also Baby Sign, which my wife had started with my daughter. And actually, I thoroughly enjoyed sitting with Hallie, seeing her engage in those scenarios. But I certainly sort of I got the feeling that people found it difficult to kind of welcome an outsider sometimes into those groups. And I think some of the things you pointed out were very true for us. So we moved to Berkhamsted, where we live now, when our daughter was 6 months old. So we did none of the kind of prenatal classes. We didn't have a network of parents in a similar position who had children at the same age. I think those groups had developed, and those groups develop, and then they all take their children to certain groups. So some friendship groups were quite entrenched and developed already by the time I was getting involved. So Hallie was nearly a year old by that sort of time. But I think it can be a real challenge. And I think, as you say, people aren't necessarily certain whether you're here for a week, just kind of minding the child for a day. So they're not necessarily, understandably, not going to just say, oh, let's all go for a coffee after class. And actually, you're also, whether that's a man or a woman, I don't know. But I think some of those entrenched groups took place. That said, there were a couple of people in each of those groups that were really kind and open to me, and I formed friendships with them. And actually, when our second child came along, and my wife took maternity again, actually she carried on those friendships, so they've become family friends, and in the local area that that we didn't expect. So it can be tough, and I also think it points at another element of parenting, which I'm sure many women are completely used to. It can be terribly lonely at times. It can be very isolating. It's you and one small person or two small people or more. But it can be, you know, compared to certainly for me, 20 years of working in digital media companies in London with kind of vibrant, diverse workforces, quite social people generally. Yeah, suddenly switching to a world where, you know, for 2 days, 3 days, sometimes you might not see, you know, anyone to have a kind of deeper interaction with.
Yeah.
I don't know if you felt the same. You know, it's kind of
Yeah. Yes, I did. You know, do you because of the groups, you know, you don't. Yes, you have that bit of interaction whilst you're there in that group, but then, you know, you come away from that and you're like, right, okay, I might not speak to another adult again until my wife's home.
yeah.
So that was a significant challenge. And whilst, you know, our parents live in the same country, they're not in the same town. You know, they're several hours away, so that, you know, they can't just pop in and help out. You can't just call up and say, "Hey, mum, you know, can you come round this afternoon and help out?" You know, that wasn't an option. Um, just briefly, because there's a few other things we want to chat about, but it got obviously even more complex with the birth of Vaughan, your son. So then there was another period of parental leave there
Yeah.
for both of you.
So yeah, so I should complete the story really. Yeah. So while I was on my 3-month period of parental leave, we found out we were expecting another baby, and actually we found out when we were 3 months pregnant already. So that baby was going to come a bit quicker than we had ever imagined, and that was a real kind of pivotal moment. So Claire, my wife, had gone back to work already. She knew full well that she would then need to take maternity again from June 2019 when our son was born. So I decided to request something else that's supported by the BBC, which is called a career break. So I took an additional 6 months off work while Claire went back to work, and I continued my kind of sole care 5 days a week of Hallie for the first part of 2019 until our son was born, and then we kind of swapped over again, and I went back to work. But yeah, that
Wonderful.
was that was a pivotal moment. I don't think we'd expected it, and it was before we got to we would have had to get to a decision about what we were going to do around childcare at the end of our additional shared parental leave period. But this kind of and again, I see it as an opportunity. The opportunity came up to do this. As it happened, it was quite a opportune moment at work. Some teams were being restructured over that time, and actually it wasn't a major problem for me to be away from the business for a period. But I was fully supported by my management there, and my role was kept open for me. My position was kept open for me. My particular role
Right.
changed, but that's an incredibly liberating position to be in. I think it was it was really important for my wife Claire, who'd obviously already spent 9 months away from work, and actually was keen to kind of get back to re-establishing her career. And I think it can be a real it could have been a really stressful situation where we were trying to juggle childcare or think about what's the right childcare for a 1-year-old, and I think we were convinced that we were probably a bit early for nursery and those sorts of things. So actually I think for
Definitely.
Claire to know that Hallie was at home with me gave her peace of mind, and for me it just gave me a really unique opportunity to spend 6 months with my daughter when she was really kind of changing and really starting to do things. So it's a cliche, but sort of take her first steps, hear her say her first words, which was dog, instantly. But those sorts of things, I feel very grateful now for having that time. I wouldn't want to. I don't want to downplay how challenging it is as well, and I think it's given me a real useful perspective of how challenging childcare on the ground is with, and that's helped me as a manager, certainly at the BBC, but hopefully in
Well,
roles in.
that's where I'd like to go next, if I may. So you mentioned obviously the management at the BBC were hugely supportive. You know, obviously there's policies in place to support that. That's really wonderful. Two-part question. One, how was what you did viewed within your area of the business, your direct reports, you know, your team, etc., both male and female? And then secondly, if you were starting a company and you wanted to put some policies in place, what do you feel you've learned from this whole experience that over time, because you know, it's like with anything, when you're implementing policies, procedures, benefits, and all the rest of it, it's not something you can just go switch on, there you go, that's everything you've got access to. It takes time to build up these things as the business and develops and grows, revenue wise and people wise. So you know, what sort of things would you sort of share and recommend that companies could implement?
So if I go back to your first question, how is this kind of viewed by male and females alike? I think almost just incredibly positively by everybody. I think from kind of male senior colleagues, delighted for me that I could take the opportunity to spend that time with my children. So some of the people on my team that I directly managed had kids a number of years ago and were just excited for me, which is just a really nice, just a really nice feeling to have. And then particularly, I had some very just really positive feedback from kind of female members of my team, particularly that a senior person in that role was prepared to put their family first, was prepared to think more flexibly, and actually be, you know, a bit of a beacon for others in the organization to do the same. So that obviously, you know, I work with people who had kids, and sometimes their husbands weren't in a position to do this. So I think I feel very fortunate that I work for an organisation that is that cares about diversity in all its forms, and that's quite true. And I think that's reflective of the workforce we have. So particularly in my teams, it's quite a balance. There are many men, women, people from all over the world, people from different backgrounds, and that's really healthy. And I know from a fact where I've kind of spoken to friends who perhaps work in more traditional industries like the legal profession or banking, where things like this just wouldn't be available. And more than that, they would be absolutely detrimental to your career, or there is a perception that they would be detrimental to your career. So I feel very grateful to have the kind of protections of the organization to make sure that that's not a reality. But I also think you have to have your own confidence that that is not a reality, and it won't necessarily negatively impact your career. And actually, I think, as I've said, I think it can be a real positive, because it gives you a real empathy for the challenges of childcare. So I think that the reaction has been extremely positive. I think Claire, my wife, was always joked that I would be the poster boy and on kind of posters in the lifts in the office for pushing forward some of these policies. But yeah, I think on the whole it was just really embraced, and people were delighted to see someone in a senior position, obviously having to battle with these decisions, which everybody does, but actually it not being the inevitability that it normally is, and actually that it was me that was going to take a step back from work for a while to kind of look after my family.
Well, wonderful. So touching on those policies then, so I'm getting the sense of you feel that in a parallel universe, you know, you're running a business. For you, you've got a great sense of perspective, understanding, empathy towards people in sort of parental situations. You feel that you'd be more flexible in terms of
perhaps working hours, perhaps working location, for example, because here we are in December 2020, and this year has effectively seen the whole world business environment thrown up into the
Yeah.
air and come land in a completely different form. So the rule books have been not just ripped up, but they've been burned essentially. And I think individuals, employees have been given a greater sense of perspective on what's important to them, having spent so much time at home, whether that be with family or not. But also, within the business environment, the leaders, because they're human as well. All management are the same as everybody else. They've got lives and families and houses and relatives that they want to see and everything. And so this whole concept of a 9 to 5, 30 in an office with all your co-workers, with a half an hour to an hour and a half commute either side, and not seeing your kids and everything like that, that for me feels like that's been smashed. I'm notwithstanding, I'm sure there are roles that once this is all back to some sort of normality, there absolutely will be some industries that they demand to go back to that kind of thing, stock trading and finance,
Yeah.
and that kind of thing. But for many other industries, I think we've seen that mold shattered now, and we'll slowly rebuild, because I think obviously it's gone to the other end of the extreme. We're not advocating saying, well, life as it has been for this year is the way that it's going to be going forward, and everyone should be given the complete flexibility and everyone should work from home 5 days a week. That's not what we're saying here, right? What we're saying is that over time we can start to sort of bring back some elements of what's absolutely necessary for the business, but bring in more flexibility.
Yeah. So I think it is a really kind of pertinent time to be talking about these sorts of things, and I think I sort of feel that kind of at Christmas, but no, just at the end of a kind of very tough year. And as you say, I think the pandemic has smashed through some perceptions that weren't quite correct. So my view is that the kind of parental policies are reflective of wider inflexible policies in organizations. And I think I would include things like dress code, those sorts of things, but also the kind of presenteeism that exists in some organizations. So kind of like loathe you if you leave your desk at 4:30 to get home to help with your kids, because that's just not the done thing. You need to be at your desk to a particular time. And there's almost in certain industries, and I've worked in some of these companies, where there's a kind of bravado to that, or a fear of not, if you were the one to kind of leave, but that had nothing to do with productivity. And I think that the pandemic has kind of smashed through some of those things, and I feel there are a number of industries that have revealed that actually you don't need your entire workforce in from 8:30 till 6 every day to be productive, and actually allowing and trusting a certain flexibility, where particularly those with parents, but also those with other situations. So I work for an organization that has people of all ages, and I'm in a very lucky position that I have an office space to work in, to do my work. I know that there are young software developers in our organization that are living at home, sharing a flat with 4 others, sharing an internet connection, and those sorts of things. I sort of feel that the pandemic has proved that if you are able to kind of trust your workforce, focus less on the kind of presenteeism of clock watching, you can get great work done. And I think that's a real enabler for how some of these policies might develop in organizations in the future. So it's not necessarily, it might not require that someone takes 6 months off to look after their children. It might require that they can leave the office at 4 p.m. to pick up their child from nursery and take them home, and then actually log on later in the evening to do that, or not do the commute 5 days a week, and those sorts of things. So I think this could be a really, there's not many positives that have come out of this horrible situation, but it could be a really liberating thing for the workforce, and I think people have embraced that kind of balance, that work-life balance, and actually are being kind of trusted to manage that a little more. So you know, in short, I sort of think these are not just about kind of if I was thinking about policy in organizations, it's not just about kind of a laser focus on parental leave and those sorts of things. I think it's about the entirety of your working culture and the sorts of flexibility you allow and space you create to let people be productive. I guess the other element for me at the BBC was that I worked across 3 office locations, and so did many of our staff. So we used to travel quite a lot. Working from home certainly wasn't a challenge. So we were very well set up for the pandemic when it came, in terms of video calls like this. We use various technologies like Slack and those sorts of things to kind of to work across various areas. I sort of think, though, those sorts of tools haven't always been embraced in every industry, and actually I really think if you need to see this in the round, rather than say, okay, we'll give it, you know, it's just about a policy of giving everybody 3 months shared parental leave. I actually think that solves a problem for a period of time. Actually, you could argue that it's going to be more challenging with mine and your children when they're at school, and when, you know, they need to go to school at 9 and they finish at 3, and actually you've got to deal with the care at either end of the day. So it might need to be, you know, there's an argument that flexibility is a permanent thing, not just a kind of a checkbox.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. And finally, Ian, I'm seeing a guitar a bit behind you there, so I'm intrigued to know what you did to get some me time, if you like, not only from the parental side of things, but from your, you know, your job. You know, we all need things to do to sort of get our minds clear and clear ahead. And what sort of things do you get up to in your spare time?
So the guitar is a go-to for me. It's something I've been playing since I was 15 years old. It's a real passion of mine, but it's also incredibly accessible. So you can, I've got a few of these things in many rooms spread across the house. So during moments where kind of children are sleeping, quite easy to just kind of pick up and play for 15 minutes. So that's always been my go-to, and actually that hasn't really changed since children came along. That's important. Where we both live is a lovely part of the world and surrounded by some terrific countryside, and actually for both of us that's very accessible. So I can walk out of my front door and be out in fields in 5 minutes, and certainly that's what I've been doing during the kind of pandemic. But that was also, you know, a really important part of kind of my headspace while I was permanently looking after children. And I think so cycling's a big thing for me. It's very tough to find the time in the winter months to do that. But in the summer months it was great. You know, I could literally get kids bathed, to bed, sleeping, head out at 7 o'clock for a bike ride, and quite a difference to my life in London, where you used to spend an hour getting out to the green stuff before you could have a ride. So having that accessible has been great. And then kind of finally, and I've got you to thank for this, kind of bringing me back into tennis after a period of 5 or 6 years of not playing, and you kind of encouraging me to join the local tennis club, where I've really enjoyed meeting up with you and trying to remember how to play. But those things are really important. Actually, tennis has proved to be a really accessible one from that perspective. So I think if you recall back in the days of longer days, we would be on the court at 6:30 or 7 in the morning, and we could have a good hour game of tennis. I could get back, and then I could take over my childcare responsibilities from 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning. So having those things is really important. also kind of during the middle of the day, you're obviously not going to go out and do all those things when there's a baby sleeping in a cot. So the guitar is very useful for those sorts of things. But then, yeah, I just found myself catching up on stuff that I hadn't watched, seen, or listened to. So podcasts were a big thing for me, certainly during looking after children. So you can put a pair of headphones on, go about your the chores between
Snaps and everything,
tidying up, all those sorts of things. So that's a real go-to. And then I would say this, having worked for BBC iPlayer and worked in on-demand streaming, but being able to kind of switch the TV on and catch up on documentaries or things that drama series that you haven't found the time to
wonderful.
To watch.
Yeah, I mean the tennis thing for me, just to finish off there, is as I'm a golfer, that's my primary sport. But the realization is, obviously, when you've got small children, you need to be there for and help with the care. So what the tennis gave me was instead of the 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours out of the day off playing golf with your buddies, you and I were able to, end to end with the game of tennis itself, with the traveling, getting ready and the getting back and all the rest of it. It's an hour and a half tops, and you've had a wonderful bit of exercise, bit of adult interaction, in the fresh air, played some sport, feel invigorated, and it's not really had a massive impact on the day.
Yeah. No, it's been great. And hopefully next year we'll get to back to a bit more normality and a bit more frequency. It's been stop-start over the last few months, hasn't it? Yeah,
it has. Ian, I can't thank you enough for sharing your time with us and your journey, your career, but also the family life and the things that you've learned along the way. Hopefully the viewers and listeners, whether they're parents or not, hopefully a lot of these people are managers of people, and hopefully got some great human element things that they can implement. So again, just finally, thanks so much for your time. Looking forward to getting together when it's safe to do so, and getting some tennis in and having a beer.
Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. It's been great to chat. Merry Christmas.
Thanks very much, and thank you for joining us on another episode of Business Source.